Conservative Voices Silenced. I'm Christine Sposato, and I'm excited to be your guide through the stories that matter. Stories of resilience, strength, and triumph in a world that doesn't always make space for conservative voices.
And I'm Elizabeth Smith, joining Christine in this journey. We know how it feels when your beliefs seem to be drowned out by the noise, but here on this podcast, we're turning up the volume.
That's right, Elizabeth, and we're creating a space where conservative voices can speak their truths, sharing the challenges they've faced and the victories they've celebrated.
Conservative Voices Silenced is not just a podcast, it's a movement that recognizes the diversity within conservatism and gives a platform to those who felt marginalized.
So whether you're a conservative looking for reliable stories or someone curious about the experiences of those with differing viewpoints, you're in the right place.
Get ready for an engaging ride as we dive into the trials and triumphs of conservatives navigating a progressive world. We invite you to join us on this journey of discovery, understanding, and most importantly, amplifying voices that deserve to be heard.
This is Conservative Voices Silenced, where silence ends and the conversation begins. Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, I am here. I'm your host of Conservative Voices Silence. I have my co-host, Elizabeth Smith. And hello. Today we are joined by Adam Coleman. He is the author of a fabulous book, Black Victim to Black Victor. He was also, we interviewed him on our episode 6. So if you haven't listened to that one yet, you should go back and listen to it. Adam is the author of that book. He also has his own Substack. He is a publisher. He has his own documentary. And he also is the documentary creator, producer. He's doing the whole thing. And then he also is involved with some community organizations and is really a community leader. His voice is, I think, unique and necessary. He's articulate and fabulous and inspiring. And so with that, let's bring on Adam. Okay, this morning we are going to be talking about families, family structure, and the importance of families in our society. Adam, you have a lot to say on this topic, and from what I've read, what I understand is that a lot of it comes from your first person experience as well as, your work in the community. So to kick us off, can you tell us about your firsthand experience and how fatherlessness has influenced your life?
Sure. Greatly. It's influenced it greatly. Just from a basic standpoint as a young man, understanding what it is to be a man, and understanding that your father is the most important male figure in your life. For their daughters, the father represents a healthy male figure, or potentially a healthy male figure. He models what a type of interaction that she should have with her future partners, just by understanding him as an example. And for young men, he models the same thing, but he also teaches them other important aspects of and qualities of being a man, on top of being that male reassurance and disciplinarian for young men. So I think not having that leads kids to be lost in the world. They call them lost children. And so in my circumstance, I spend a lot of years unsure of myself, if I'm doing the right thing, if I'm behaving the right way, or if I didn't have enough confidence in the things that I was trying to pursue, and not having that reassurance from a father figure was extremely detrimental for me.
What that makes me think about is the nuances of learning and how our brain works. I'm a child development specialist, and we learn in such subtle ways that even when just an example, of how we learn language and we learn speech, and even nuances in language, and even accents, how children
Hmm.
acquire an accent. Like when you think of their speech apparatus and how they're learning to use all those muscles in their mouth because they hear it auditorily, and then they work on modifying how their muscles work so they can more accurately imitate what they're hearing around them. That's just something so obvious as speech. But when you think of all the subtle things that we just take in as children, that we absorb like little sponges when we're learning, all of those
Hmm.
little nuances, body language, eye contact, um, it is so profound, and people take it so for granted.
Right. No, and that's exactly it. We've come to a point where we take for granted the importance of men in relation to their children. Um, you know, I I didn't model the most ideal situation for my son based off of how I grew up, and so I didn't understand the order of getting married, then having children, and then so on and so forth. Um, and so, I had my son out of wedlock. And even with me being involved in my son's life, I would see him every weekend. And I remember thinking, like, as I got older, thinking back to the people like, oh, that's great that you see him every weekend. And I feel like that's such a low standard because I always feel like I'm behind. Like I'm always trying to figure out what's going on. Even if our communication's fine, either between myself and my son or his mother, I'm always a step behind. Whereas if he was with me every day, I would know what's going on. Um, and so I'm saying this as someone who's trying to be involved in his child's life. So I just feel like we have we have lowered our expectations on father involvement. I've heard people say, "I see my son, once was it every other weekend?" Like that seems to be the standard. Every other weekend, the kids come over. They have an artificial experience where he buys them some pizza and they hang out for a night, and then the next day they send them back to their moms. And like you can't you can't truly have like any sort of understanding what's going on in their life by having that amount of interaction, and you're not rubbing off in the way that you think you're rubbing off in such a short period of time. um, the kids need to see you, they need to watch you. One of the things that impacted me was when someone told me that your son watches you, and they meant it literally. He's watching you, and he's watching your mannerisms, he's watching how you respond, and and whether he's doing it consciously or unconsciously, but he's watching. you know
Yep.
Yeah.
I made a post the other day about manners, that if it's important for your kids to have manners, but if you're not also mimicking manners, then their kids aren't going to be as good with them. I would rather say please and thank you too much than have my kids not say it enough. And
right.
I remind them too, that's not just at school or at the store you're saying it. Use manners with your sisters, with your brothers, with me, your dad. And it's, well, a lot of kids, sadly, nowadays, I see that they aren't being taught manners, or they're only being taught manners at certain places and not all the time.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing we drove home with my son. And he's much like me. I say thank you to everybody all the time for everything. Like if you do something, you hand me something, thank you.
Yep.
If I'm at McDonald's, you hand me my food, thank you. Right.
Yep.
And it's actually a pet peeve of mine when they don't say you're welcome back.
Yeah, I'm the same way.
So
Yeah.
Or there's, the new one is no problem.
Mm-hmm.
That's got
Yeah.
a whole different meaning than saying you're welcome.
Yep.
I throw in no problem. It depends what it is.
Adam, I have your Substack article, Why Fatherless Children Are a Casualty of the Oppressive Narrative. Fabulous, fabulous piece of work. I love it.
Thank you.
And some of the things that I highlighted, there's one section. This comes down to what type of statistics you want to focus on. While Black Americans have a higher rate of single parenthood than white Americans, the total number of white children growing up in separate homes is more than Black children. I believe the total impact matters. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
So the part of the reason why I wrote it was because after publishing my book and started talking about fatherlessness and going on podcasts and things of that nature, I noticed that the vast majority of people who reach out to me to either talk about this experience for them or their family members was white. And I was thinking to myself, everybody's highlighting, Black fatherless children, and there's a valid reason to talk about it, but it almost felt like, because they would thank me for talking about it, because they were looking past the color aspect, because most of the time I'm talking about it in very general sense. And they thanked me for talking about it. And I started thinking over a period of time that their stories are kind of overlooked, because every white person is seen as being having a favorable life. They don't have any issues.
Mhm.
They're home. All of you are in nuclear families, and everything is wonderful.
Mhm.
And I go back and think, well, I have all these people who reach out to me, who don't look like me, who've had similar experiences or worse. I've had people who have been physically abused by their parents, sexual abuse by either their parents or their step parents or boyfriend, something of that nature. I've talked to all these people and they don't look like me. There are a lot of people out there who are hurting who do not look like me. And this narrative of, well, because you're white, by osmosis, your life is perfect and everything is great. Meanwhile, I'm the one who has all the trauma, and
Right.
generational curse and all this other stuff. And it's like, well, a lot of people are hurting, right? It's not to say
Yeah.
that there aren't Black children who are experiencing something, or Hispanic children, or anybody else. Is that American children in general are suffering when nearly a quarter of them are growing up in separate homes from their parents. And I've talked about the vulnerability of single parenthood when it comes to the child. And that's for so many of the stories where, whether it's like firsthand accounts where people tell me their experience. And actually, I'll give you an example. I went on one podcast and I started talking more about how single parenthood is a vulnerability for children because the rate of physical, sexual, or some sort of abuse increases tremendously when there is
Mhm.
an adult figure that's living within the home that is not their parent. So whether it's the girlfriend moves in or the boyfriend moves in,
Mhm.
that statistic climbs tremendously. And I say it's a vulnerability because I think most often, if it's someone who's a non-parental figure, it's probably a boyfriend, right? That's doing something of this nature. So you have the single mother who has these kids. Well, she has to work, right? So she can't be in two places at once. So that means that somebody is either watching them or being around them, and she's not there to protect them.
Yeah.
And having an involved father figure is that safeguard. It's the one thing that kind of lowers the possibility of something happening. But because of that situation, whether it's mommy has a boyfriend and he comes and sleeps over, and when mommy's asleep, he goes in the other kid's room, that's a real situation. And when I was talking about it on the podcast and I finished, the guy told me, one of the co-hosts said, what you just described was my childhood.
Wow.
And this is a very real thing, him being molested by his stepfather. And this is why I'm talking about it, and he was white, right?
Mhm.
And this is the pain that a lot of children are going through, whether they're Black, whether they're white. I think there are a lot of Black children who are going through this as well. The level of vulnerability is extremely high. And I see all different types of circumstances, even just online, because you have reckless parents who post stuff online and they tell them themselves, you know?
Right.
Wow. I'm
I
just
actually
processing all of that.
I highlighted the exact same spot you did, Christine. Check my staff now.
Oh.
No, yeah,
Yeah.
it is absolutely a great Substack. It really
Thank you.
is. You're welcome.
And maybe this leads down a different road, or maybe it's the same road, because we're talking about the foundation of families in our society, or the crumbling of families in our society. But it just seems like we have become so self-centered, and we have become so instant gratification.
Yeah.
And you know I can own this. I divorced my children's father when they were in middle school-ish, rough time for a divorce. And the history doesn't really matter. But the point is that uh, I look back now, 35 years later, or 30 years later, however long it's been, and had we been more mature, had we been playing the long game, had we been committed to something bigger than ourselves, I'd love to point the finger at him, but I'm not gonna, because I was in it too. I think both of us had a role in that we could have provided a better home for our children. And certainly there is a level of brokenness, and my children are adults, they're grown and gone, but there's a level of brokenness in them that will never be healed. And we certainly did our best to parent them from separate homes, but like you've said, Adam, it's not the same. It's not the
Yeah.
same as having two parents at home all of the time, with interaction and intervention and the nuances that, instead of saying, well, I'm going to call your dad and see what he says about this, they're right there, and they can see all of the dimensions of relationships and decision making and guidance. Those nuances are what teach us our morals and our values, and set our standards, our baseline in life, and not a conversation on the phone necessarily. So I guess
Right.
where I'm going with this is, we've just become such narcissistic people that if we aren't happy right now or next year or the year after that, oh my gosh, it's time to pivot. And let's just and what's happening in our pivot is our kids are getting left in the dust. And I think we're being told it's okay, they can see a counselor, they can see a therapist, life is all good and it's rainbows and unicorns. But in their soul, in the depth of their emotional space of who they are developing into human beings, they're not okay. A therapist, a counselor can't fix that. There's a piece of them
Right.
that gets broken.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think to kind of use another term, it's pleasure seeking. We're told that you deserve to be
Yeah.
happy.
Yeah.
But you don't deserve to be happy. You earn happiness, right? You create
Yeah.
your own happiness, right? But there's another word that we kind of discard. It's called sacrifice. And
Yes.
I'm sorry if right now you're not happy. You're supposed to sacrifice your happiness for the greater good, which is your children, and
Yep.
be adults and maybe work things out over a period of time. I knew there's a friend of my, there's a family friend of, especially of my sister, she was close to. And I remember their daughter graduated high school, and they were staying together until she finished school. And then they were going to separate. Like it was relatively understood, but they did not want to separate until she was out of the house. And I respect that. Right? They're like, listen, we're going to sacrifice because it's much better for us to be here. We get along in front of the kids, and then we go our separate ways. If that's what you want to do, then that's what you want to do. if people are getting divorced and not bringing children into the world, then so be it. That's what it is. But once you start bringing kids into this world, they look at you as an example. And,
Yeah.
when we're talking about divorce, or whether we're talking about children growing up in single parent homes where there's like in my situation, where there's no solid relationship, um, your children see that as an example, and like a very prominent example in their lives, whether they want to model it or they don't. That's why I usually see how children see things in life, especially when it comes to their parents. They either become their parents or completely reject their parents. It's usually not, there's no real in between. And I think they're more likely to replicate what their parents are doing because it's familiar behavior versus completely reject it. And in my circumstance, I wanted to reject what my father did, rather than completely repeat what he had done. But there are a lot of people who are just fine with that, whatever it is, and they continue that cycle. But we have to understand that we are modeling the behavior for our kids, and their belief in marriage stems from you as an example. And I've seen people where they have had parents who stayed together for 30 plus years, and I see how they strive to make sure that they stay married, because they're like, my parents stayed together for 35 years. I am not going to get divorced after 2, right?
Yeah.
We're going to figure this out. They work really hard to stay together. But then I see people who grew up in single parent homes, never married, and they don't believe marriage is even a thing. They like, what's the point? What's the point? And I think if I can give like a female analysis as a man, but like
Go for it. Because we unapologetically give lots of narratives to men from a female point of view. We don't even apologize for it.
So one of the things I started thinking about is when I see women who grew up and their father wasn't around, the way I kind of translate it is because I watch their behavior, and one, they're really easy to become susceptible to feminism, because feminism is very misandrous, and it's easy to hate something that you're not familiar with. But it's also really easy to hate something that constantly disappointed you. And if your father, who's supposed to be the most important male figure in your life, lets you down, every other man is going to fail, right? Because she doesn't believe, like, my father didn't come around, and that's what men are, right? Men are like my father. So even if she gets into some sort of relationship, she is waiting for the disappointment, right?
Yeah.
She's waiting for the first argument. See, you guys ain't nothing. I'm out. And then she wants to break apart. I can do bad by myself, and live some miserable, lonely life. And I've seen that over and over and over. Whether it's she grew up without her father, or her father just one day up and left, so I think that's having a big impact as well.
I guess where this is also leading is to this whole cultural shift that men are disposable and men are just absolutely unnecessary. And in fact, men are offensive. It's just offensive to have men around is kind of the new social narrative. It's our new culture. Men should walk into a room and apologize for being a man. And especially if you're a white man, oh, good grief. And then you better just sit down and really be quiet. This power shift, this culture shift, I think is so damaging because of families. And I think men now are questioning their validity. My first interview on this podcast was with a recent college graduate. And one of his statements was that college men aren't dating anymore because women are so difficult that they would rather just not even date than tangle with girls in college.
Mm-hmm.
Because as you're saying, they come to the table with these preconceived ideas and they're just waiting for guys to prove it out that they're unworthy of them. And so he said that guys aren't even dating, they're just hanging out with other guys because they're afraid of women. So how do we change that? How do we address that shift that's going on? And yeah.
Well, I think that a lot of men have neutered themselves. I think narratives are usually bigger than the reality. I don't think every woman is a feminist. I don't think every woman is going to give false rape accusations. I don't think anything like that. However, it's that rarity that it's always the horror stories that make people scared and to do nothing. It's like George Floyd is the horror story of getting pulled over by a cop, let's just say. And so now you get pulled over by a cop and he's just letting you know that your taillight's out, here's a warning, have a nice day. And you're standing, you're shaking, you're scared. So I think we have all these horror stories that circulate in the media and it's fooling everybody. And it makes people very nihilistic about the world, about their situation, about the opposite sex, about the opposite race, or whatever it might be. And we're not fighting hard enough to go outside and interact with people to see if it's true.
Right.
I think the remedy for most of this stuff is go outside and talk to people, right? But if you stay on the internet, well, you're going to read nothing but nihilism and the sky is falling and everything is horrible. Well, that's where the nihilists go. Right? But go outside, go to your job, talk to people, right? Are you going to find a nihilist here and there? Sure. But are most people like this? No. And so I think there needs to be a measure of comparing narratives to reality, right? And interacting with people. Maybe even leave your town and go to other places. Go to another country. Right? Just talk to people. And you start to realize like, the world isn't as bad as they make it seem. But every day you go online and everybody says that the sky is falling. And so I think that a lot of people they're not checking reality to see if the narratives are true. And also, I will say this, because we understand the number of young men who are growing up without their fathers in the home, and I will add, with their fathers in the home, but they are weak fathers. Because I have seen there's sort of a shift in dynamics where weaker men are getting with stronger women, more domineering women. And so the men don't speak up for themselves when they need to. And so they're modeling the behavior for their kids. And so if their behavior is that, well, women get to speak and say and make accusations and tell us what to do. And I am now scared of women, right? And it's like, no, there's a balance between it. Yes, you listen to your mother. She's an authority figure, but so is your father. And one doesn't rule over the other. There's some balance to it. So I think there are a lot of young men who are scared of women because they have mommy issues, just as young women have daddy issues.
Yep. Very
Very
true.
well said. Adam, you suggested getting out of your comfort zone and out of your community. Tell us about your documentary or your show that you're going around and recording and producing, and how is this viewed in other cultures or other communities? The American culture, and then the importance of family or the centrality of family in other cultures. Have you observed that in your travels and your interviews, even within the United States? Have you seen differences?
Yeah, I mean, there are regional cultures. I will say that I've definitely talked to people in the UK, and the UK is having very similar issues very much so, if not just about the same. I want to say I think it's like 23% of American children are growing up in separate homes. I think in the UK it's 20%. They're just behind us. So I know that they're number 2 in the world. We're number 1. So their fatherlessness issue is almost as great as ours, percentage wise. And so I know that my message resonates with them. And just like how you were talking about young men trying to find women and that dynamic, I know it's hard for them out there. I've talked to Londoners. It's hard for them out there because it's like, I have one guy friend who's like trying to date. He's like, it's so hard not finding a woman who's not a feminist. Like, it's like, oh my God. So, it's that kind of dynamic, because she's coming to the table with animosity. He's not trying to come with that. He's trying to find a partner, like someone he can have a relationship with who respects him. So I completely understand, but the project that I'm working on is called Breaking Bread. The whole thing about it is that it's very casual. It is just 2 people, and actually I'm going to start having episodes where there's groups of us, where we're having a meal and we're just talking about whatever comes to mind. And it's a natural conversation. And part of the reason I even started doing this was because I was doing it in real life. Years ago, I started traveling abroad, primarily to Europe. And I started solo traveling, and then I would just meet people. Or while I was out in some country, I would come across someone who's also a tourist, and we'd sit down and talk. I can remember in Barcelona, I was having tapas with an Australian woman, and we were talking about American politics for like 2 hours, right? And we were just having casual conversation, and I've just done that so many times with different people from all over the world, and it gave you a really good understanding as far as the perspective of other people, even with them trying to interpret American politics. I stayed at a hostel, and there was a Swedish boy, I think it was a girl from South Korea and a girl from China. And I was like, well, you have an American in the room. Anything you ever want to ask an American? All right. And then we were just asking each other questions, and we were just talking for hours, and giving our perspective. And it's that kind of thing where, you're seeing where people are coming from. So what I'm trying to do is encourage conversation, and not just with people who are always like-minded. Actually, I just filmed an episode yesterday with a woman who's a Democratic strategist in DC. But I started talking to her because we appeared on the same show, and she was very cordial. And so we kind of kept in contact. So I drove down to DC, and we sat down and talked. And there wasn't one time I said I disagree, because I understood where she was coming from. And there are areas where we were able to find common ground. And I'm a very moderate person, and I don't agree with everything that she thinks, of course. And that's fine. I disagree with people who are on the right all the time. But my goal wasn't to debate her. My goal was to find commonality with her and have a good conversation. Because when you're in front of someone and you're having a meal, you're usually not trying to argue with someone, right? And it's even more personal because most of the time I'm getting invited to their home. So I'm inside her house, right? And am I going to be disrespectful and argue with someone inside their house? I just set up my cameras for 45 minutes and then I'm going to turn them on and try to insult. Like, no.
Right.
Like, so all of this it's done in good faith. I only want to talk to people that I know will be done in good faith. I don't need to sit across someone who's a sycophant. I don't need all that. Are you a good person? Let me see where you're coming from, and we'll have a conversation. So I'm trying to speak with people. I've talked to people who are further to the right of me, and we have a conversation, and I don't necessarily agree with everything that they assert, but I add on to what they're saying, and we have a nice casual conversation. I was in London with Graham Linehan. We had a great conversation, but we're on the opposite ends on abortion, and we talked about it. And he's like, that's interesting, because we were both on the opposite ends He used to be pro-life, and then he became pro-choice. I was vice versa. And he was like, tell me, like, what made you switch? What made you switch? And we were just having this conversation. And at the end of it, he was like, that was the best conversation I've had in quite a while. And I was like, yeah, because it's all done in good faith. And even though we don't agree on the abortion thing, I understand why you switch, and I understand where you're coming from. So I'm trying to bring that. Like, I'm tired of the demonizing. I'm tired of the all Democrats are Democrats and all this other stuff.
Right.
And I'm like, man, I know a lot of Democrats who'd vote Republican if they could find somebody who was more reasonable, right? And vice versa.
Mhm.
You know, so I think that we have far more in common, even politically, um, in this country than we really believe. And the proof is there. Every other election, we go vice versa: Democrat, Republican, Democrat, Republican. Why do you think that
Mhm.
is? It's because a lot of people are somewhere in the middle. Why do we have swing states? Because they swing back and forth. Because
Mhm.
people see a candidate on one side and like that person this time. Like, duh, it makes sense. And we're trying to pretend that our country is far more polarizing, that we have nothing in common. We need to have a national divorce. Like,
Right.
you know, and it's like, no,
Yeah.
no,
Mhm.
we don't need all that.
I just read somebody posted something in a group, and it was a young man, and he said, "Uh, I I connected with a woman online, and we were, seemed to be getting along fine. We were resonating, and we were getting ready to set up a time to meet. And she messaged me and said, I just dug into some of your posts that you posted 3 years ago, and you had posted a post that was anti-abortion. So I am not going to meet you." And he said she immediately unfriended him, and that was it. And he said they had been talking for weeks. And
Mm,
I think you're to your point, we have gotten into polarization now has become the norm, and meeting in
right.
the middle is something that is, out of the norm, unusual. Like, really, Adam, you can go talk to people who aren't just like you? Wow. That used to be the norm, is that
Right.
we would try to find
Conversation.
commonality and respect people for their position or their belief or their philosophies. So people are looking for are looking for a fight. And I advise, when I work with college students, I advise them before they enter a conversation to stop and consciously think about going into their heart and try to connect with the other person from their heart and not their head. When we get
Mhm.
so wrapped up in our thoughts and our arguments and what's going on in our head, we stop listening. And when we can connect to somebody as another human being, and we try to respect them as another human on this planet with us, that's a different kind of a conversation. And that's what I hear you describing with your Breaking Bread show, is that you enter
Mhm.
those rooms and those spaces from a heart place, wanting to connect with other people, no matter what their philosophy is.
Right. Like, I'll give you an example. The woman I was sitting across, her name is Crystal Knight. Um, and while I was setting up, we were talking, and she
Mhm.
mentioned she traveled. So when we started, we didn't dive into politics. I asked her about traveling. I was like, "Oh, so where have you gone?" And maybe for like five or so minutes, we were just talking about traveling. So we were connecting on that level,
Mhm.
and then it gradually shifted into culture, and then a little bit of politics, and we found that we have a lot in common. And I'm watching her nod her head. Now, mind you, she's a Democrat strategist.
Right.
And we are finding, like, yes, you're absolutely right. And she's saying something. I was like, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh shoot, we have a lot in common. And so much so that we want to try and work together on a piece. Because I was talking about something. She's like, I want to co-author that. So and I want to keep
Yeah.
that relationship going with her. And I'm hoping to try to, it sounds cliche to bridge the gap, but like, I just want to go back to what it was. I was talking to David Marcus, a columnist, and he was in Brooklyn. And yes, he was in a more left-leaning circle, but they would talk about this stuff and they would joke with each other, and you're like, because he's the one conservative, and it would like, what are the Republicans doing? And he was like, what about Obama? And right, and then they have a drink and they keep going, right?
Mhm.
And he's like, all of that stopped because of Trump, all of it. Everybody just became deadly serious and just
Yeah.
picked some sort of line in between, and they stopped
Yeah.
talking. So I just want to go back to that. I don't have to agree with you on everything. But someone like Crystal, I'm like, hey, I support you. Let me know how I can help you. So and
That's right.
if she can do the same back, she can do the same back. And she does not have to agree with what I'm saying.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, lack of communication. Everything nowadays is it's my way or the highway. Nobody wants to and I miss having conversations. I miss being able to talk to any friend about whatever and we're still friends at the end. Instead, you get, well, whatever, and you get blocked. You get unfriended. Like, why? We're not adults
Yeah.
anymore. The whole keyboard warrior thing is it's out of control. We need to go back to the cell phones where you had to type the one number so many times for each letter. There'll be less keyboard warriors if we go back to that.
Man, they would so give up.
They would.
Yeah,
It would
it
not
gives
be
us
worth
time
it.
to stop and think.
Yeah.
Great.
Can I just want to add one thing, and I completely agree. If you engage in it, from your heart and just try to see them as a human being, I think that's really beneficial. However, it's a two-way street.
Mhm.
And so my number one
Yeah.
rule when in person, online, I do not engage in bad faith conversations.
Yep.
I do not. If I'm talking to you and you say something and you imply something and I'm like, whoa, like I'm not insulting you. I'm not implying anything and I'll say like, this has turned into a bad faith conversation. Have a good day. And I'll just leave. Like I have no interest in being right and proving anything to you, Mr. Stranger. So
Right.
like
Yep.
I'm out and my time is valuable to me. So that would be my number one suggestion to people. As soon as someone goes into a bad faith attempt to say, well, you're just like this, or Tucker Carlson said this, so you must think like, well, I'm not Tucker Carlson. Like, what did
Right.
I say? Right? It's that kind of thing. Do not engage in bad faith conversations because it will go nowhere. It'll be a waste of time. It's a waste of energy. And that energy could be put towards something else or somebody else.
Thanks for clarifying that. That is my second. I do have that clarification. And I have a mobile app that I've developed for conservative college students trying to navigate our liberal college campuses. And I have a series of video coaching sessions, and they are all around resilience, independence, spirituality, and emotional intelligence. And some of the coaching that I give is how to engage in these conversations that are adversarial, because they happen all the time. And as you're saying, absolutely, I say enter into it not with vulnerability, but just with respect and honesty. And if you're not getting that back, you have the right to say, this isn't going anywhere. I'm going to disengage from this conversation. Maybe we can have it another time, maybe not, but I am not going to engage in that. So I'm glad you brought that up. That is fantastic. A question that we have is that we got from a listener who was excited that you were coming on. Do you want to share that, Elizabeth?
Sure. Let me get my paper back out here.
You've got fans on our podcast, Adam.
Yours was very
followers and fans.
So I think we kind of briefly went over this earlier, but she would like to know how we can help and what we can do to make the separation of families less, to try to help. Because, you can do with your own family what you can do, but how can we help other families get to that point as well?
Well, actually, I think the key is actually just that. Because if you think of it from this standpoint, you teach your children the right order. Like I've taught my son, do not repeat what I did. You know the order. You get married, then you have children. Reinforce that. Explain to them why. Explain to them the positives. Explain to them the negatives. Right? Be honest. Be honest with your kids. Because if you think of it from this standpoint, like if you teach your daughter, let's just say you have a daughter, if you teach your daughter this, so she has one husband and she's capable though of making how many ever children, right? But if you stop her right there and she knows the right path, then she's having multiple children with one man. Or if she doesn't follow that path, she has multiple children with multiple men. And the problem just multiplies from there. And then the children don't learn the lesson, and then they continue, and they continue, and so on and so forth. So it's not to say that I'm not trying to say that the person who asked the question is minimizing it, but I don't want to minimize how important it is to start from our house, right? And because it's not just the one child, or even just if you have two kids, it's not just the two kids, but you have to see it as it's going to be like a tree, and it's going to branch out over a period of time. So the issue can either get better or it can get worse. And so even if it's someone like like me, where I didn't do it the right way, my number one objective was to tell my son, do not repeat what I did. Right, and to be honest with him, and to tell him this is the right order, and and do everything I possibly can to have him stop the cycle. And so that's extremely important. And I think once we do that in our house, as far as other people, if it's a situation of divorce and you're someone who's a confidant, or someone who's going through something, don't let them be like, don't tell them, you know what, your children are resilient. Like don't do that. No, you need to be honest with them and let them know what you're doing. I know you're not happy right now, but it doesn't mean you won't be happy in the future. And you're going to leave a stain for your kids moving forward. And that stain won't just go away after a handful of therapist visits. It won't.
Yep.
So you have to, if you're going to do this, you need to fully understand how this is going to impact your children. And if that means that person does not like you after you say that, well, then that's what it is. But that is the truth. And if you care about somebody and you know someone who's going through that, you be honest with them and don't sugarcoat it. Well, if that's what you want to do, well, you know what, he is a bit of a jerk, so just go ahead and leave him. Like, no. You like, I hear what you're going through, but the stuff that you're telling me sounds resolvable. Right? Yeah. Now, if they're coming to you and saying, listen, he's beating me constantly, okay. But that we know that is not most of the situations. Most of the situations are irreconcilable differences, whatever that means for whichever couple. And I think there needs to be more of an effort to be honest with the people who are around us. So I think that's one way. Be honest with the people who are around you. Explain to them the negatives, because I think there's a lot of sugarcoating the negative impacts for our kids. Like I said, we'll take them to therapy in the hopes that everything will be fine. And it's like, I try to tell people, just because they look fine doesn't mean that they are fine. Right? Just because, Todd grew up and he went to college and he has a career. All right, that's great. But is Todd actually fine? Because kids like Todd grow up to be men who still have unresolved issues, and then you find out that Todd killed himself. Right? on the exterior, Todd seemed like he was doing fine, but he's been having problems. He's been hiding stuff. So like, it's something that really is there. Even for myself, I've done a lot of work, and it took me a long time to make it to where I'm at to even talk about this openly with anybody. And I still have like a little piece of me that is like, I'm still disappointed in my dad though. You know?
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that will likely never go away, but it doesn't harm me in the way that it used to.
Yeah.
So I read all of your stuff. And I mean, every email, every Substack that comes through, I read it all. And you posted one before Christmas, and it says, "You deserve nothing, you earn everything." And it's absolutely phenomenal. Everybody should go read it. Subscribe to his Substack and get all the emails. And it says, "If there was a gift of advice I could give to everyone days before Christmas that took me years to understand after lots of failure, it's this. You deserve nothing, not a relationship, not career success, not wealth, nothing. You earn everything." And that's amazing.
Thank you. And
Welcome.
that's a real philosophy that I had to. There's many philosophies that I have. There's so many people who are like, I have a theory about this, and I'll tell them. And it's like, because it's just stuff that I started understanding. Like when you go, especially when you go to therapy, you become very self-aware, and you start thinking about stuff, and you start to reassess things. And I'm like, I think there are periods of my life where I didn't appreciate the journey, and I appreciate the journey now. So like the times of being homeless, and having people reach out and help me, it's about the journey. But there are plenty of times where I scraped by to reach to a point of finding stability, and it's because I had to earn that. Like I had to go through all that stuff to get to the point of not having to scrape by anymore. So, but the other thing, because I can't remember if I even said this, but I think it makes you humble.
Yes.
Like I don't take anything for granted. Like I live in a nice apartment right now with my wife, and we're looking to buy a house, and it'll be the first time that I've ever lived in a house if we're able to pull it off. And I don't take any of that for granted. But I also believe in myself enough where if something detrimental was to happen, I know I can make it out of it. So it's all these different things, but I have to earn these things. Like no one gave me any of this. All the things that have happened for me recently when it comes to writing, when it comes to appearances, all of these things was because I did something, I earned it, and no one gave it to me because I just happened to exist. I connected with people. I established these relationships. I was on time with my submissions. I did all of these things. I impressed people, and I earned everything that I got. There's also some luck, right? And there's some timing, and all that's normal. But I earned it, and so I don't say, well, why don't I have this? Well, I haven't earned it yet, right? Or it's just not my time. But it will eventually come if I keep working hard and keep doing these things and keep connecting with people. So even something like breaking bread, I've really worked hard to learn about videography and aspects of cinematography as well. Starting because to kind of give you an understanding, like April, I think it was around April. Yeah, April of last year, I just started buying cameras and stuff. But I did some research and tried to understand what I was doing. So I bought these cameras. And then I did my pilot in London. And I think I filmed like 4 sit-down sessions. One of them was good and I could use. And that became the pilot episode. But I messed up. And I had audio issues in one. And the video was fine. Then I had video issues in one. And the audio was fine. Like it was a complete mess. And then for every
Elizabeth,
time I
does
would
that
do
sound
it.
familiar?
Yes. Very.
Yeah. But for every time I was messing up and I would have some issue, but I was working hard to fix it in post. And then I would say, all right, next time I need to do this so this doesn't happen. And then the mistakes became less and less and less. And so like yesterday, I didn't have any mistakes, right? The audio was fine. There's like a little bit of ruffle in the microphone, but like that is way better than like losing your audio. Like,
Right.
right. So it's stuff like that. I had to earn it to come to this point where now the video looks like how I want it to look, where the audio is getting better and better. I have a new audio setup that I'm now learning about and making sure that it sounds proper. I actually have somebody come into my house in about an hour to film, and doing all these different things. But I had to earn the quality of the content. And what happened was I'm going to be working with a startup media company that wants to take on Breaking Bread, and have it distribute between them. And these are all things I started from absolutely I knew nothing about cameras. And so now I'm proficient enough where people are asking me camera advice and I'm able to translate it to them in less than a year. I had to earn all these things. I had to spend hours, I don't know how many hours watching YouTube videos and even doing the video editing, So
Yep.
I had to learn all this stuff from absolute scratch, but I had to do that myself. And I've had people who supported me to help me occasionally with little things here and there, but I had to eventually just do it. So no one was going to give me my video series. I had to earn it. And I appreciate it even more that it's coming out exactly how I want it to come out. And people appreciate the hard work. They can see the difference from earlier on to now. The quality of it. Everything's in focus now,
Right.
even just something as simple as that.
Right.
I'm very grateful because of it. And it's another skill set that I've learned. And so now I know I've been talking for a little bit, but like now my long-term goal is to film a documentary. And part of it is I had 2 sets of cameras initially, then I got a third camera, which is a more expensive camera. So I've been slowly upgrading the less expensive cameras to the more expensive camera. So two of the 3 that I have now are the more expensive ones. And actually, my barber is going to buy my third one from me in a couple months, and then I'll be able to upgrade. But once I do that, then I'll be able to utilize more features in preparation with Breaking Bread, with better coloring and things like that, and better imagery with these better cameras. And then I'll feel more comfortable down the line. Maybe I'll upgrade the lens to a different lens or something like that to actually have a documentary and feel comfortable enough to attempt something like this. And now that I'm working with this media company and I've pitched them my idea and she likes it, and she's like, maybe you can do more docuseries. So like all this stuff, it pays off at the end when you work hard, you connect with the right people, and you put yourself out there.
Yeah. That's very inspiring. Very inspiring, Adam. Yeah. Well, we can relate on the technical learning curve. That's
Very
for
much.
sure.
Very much.
Yeah. To close, Adam, do you have everything you say is pretty inspiring, but some profound advice and a call to action for our listeners who have families, are supporting families in their community, and the hope for the future of our children?
I think the best advice I can tell people these days is there's a lot of noise out there, and you have to decipher what's noise and what's real. And you need to sit back and listen to what people are saying. And that's the only way to verify if what you're taking in is noise or what you're taking in is actually something that's really going on. And I think it's an incredibly hard thing to do, because media is very sensational, whether it's mainstream media, independent media. they're all sensational. Independent media, unfortunately, is going the route of clickbait and really radical stuff, or showing you the most extreme of the extreme thing to make you think that there's something that's prevalent. But in reality, is it prevalent? You know, is that just noise? And what I find is that it's very much so noise. So you have to listen. You have to analyze the information that you have. You can't take everything at face value. Just like I tell my son, question me. Like, I'm your father, but you can question me. Like, I don't know everything. So, you know, question your sources, question your biases, question, like, does this make sense on its face? Even if it sounds good and it sounds like, yeah, they're giving it to the people I don't like. It's like, but does that make sense? Is that actually true though? Or is it just like, is it tickling my fancy? You know, that kind of thing. So I guess my advice is, if you want to help the people around you, stay away from the propaganda, because there's a lot of it out there and it's meant to drive you crazy. It's meant to make you think that the world is falling apart. Like I said, we need a national divorce, civil war is coming, and all this other nonsense. But yet, when you go outside, when you go to your neighbors, when you go to the grocery store, for whatever reason, there aren't people with muskets ready to shoot at each other. There's no swords out ready to cut each other apart, right? Everything seems relatively okay, and most people get relatively along and cordial enough, right? Unless you live in New York City, that might be a different story. But no, that's my. I'm from I'm from Jersey. It's my right to take a jab at New Yorkers.
I like that.
Yeah. My wife is from New York, and I always mess with her. But I would say, just be aware that there's a lot of effort to manipulate you, and it comes from people that you disagree with and the people you agree with, right? Because you're just as useful clicking on their link if you're pissed off or if you like it. So there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that going on, and I actually want to take more of an effort to talk about it. So, you know, trust your gut, stay away from the noise, and just analyze the information that you're taking in, even if you agree with it on its face.
Fabulous as always, Adam. Thank you for joining us again. Do you have websites, links, anything that you'd like to share with our listeners so they can also jump on your bandwagon? Well, some of them already are. So help us out here.
Yes. So a couple things with me. I'll just say that's upcoming. I am going to be I'm going to be part of a new clothing line that I'm modeling with. So that's happening in March. If you subscribe to my Substack, when everything is released, I'll let everybody know. AdamBColeman.substack.com. With Wrong Speak, we're getting more into book publishing. We have a new book that's being published, a first-time author that's coming out, which will be the second book outside of my book. And the last thing I'll say, I don't have a timetable on it just yet, but hopefully soon. I'm going to be releasing a second edition for Black Victim to Black Victor. It's not going to be entirely different. It's going to be cleaned up because when I released it, I was the one who edited it. My wife edited it. But now it's going to be cleaned up. And my hope is to have it be seen in maybe more schools and more professional environments as a story, as a book that is taking a little bit more seriously. So I was going to re-release it as a second edition. And I have another book that whenever I find some sort of time to sit down and write it or finish writing it. But I may try to send that to a bigger publisher to have it circulate. So hopefully I have that proposal going in the next couple months. So it's just a lot going on. That's all.
Wow.
That's great.
Well, congratulations on all that, Adam.
Yes.
Earned and deserved.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
That's fantastic. All right. Well, thank you so much for being with us. And We'd love to check in again in a while and see how that clothing line is going and how Breaking Bread is going. That's really exciting.
Thank you.
So thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day. Nice seeing you again, Adam.
Nice seeing you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thanks.